I sat at the edge of the crowd, 5 rows from the back, dressed in a simple gray suit that felt like a disguise. Around me, naval officers stood tall in their gleaming whites, medals catching the light, posture perfect. The air was thick with pride and polish. This was my brother Michael's promotion ceremony, golden boy of the Thompson family, following in our father's decorated footsteps. Someone behind me whispered, "A real Thompson," and I didn't even flinch. I'd heard that phrase my whole life. They didn't see me. To them, I was just Emma, the dropout, the disappointment, the daughter who couldn't hack military life and disappeared into some vague government job no one bothered asking about. That was the story my family told until General Phillips walked to the podium, scanned the room, and said 3 words that made my father's face go white. "Major Thompson? Emma?" Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I wasn't born different, just born female in a house where that detail determined everything. The Thompson legacy stretched back 4 generations, admirals, commanders, men who led operations and shaped military history. Our house in Norfolk, Virginia wasn't just a home, it was a museum to male achievement. Medals in glass cases. Photos of uniformed men shaking hands with presidents. My father, Admiral James Thompson, collected praise the way other fathers collected fishing lures or vintage cars. Growing up, I learned military protocol before I learned multiplication tables. Dinner conversations revolved around deployment strategies and chain of command. When guests came over, my mother served drinks while my father and brother talked tactics. I was expected to smile, help in the kitchen, and dream about marrying someone just like them someday. But I had different dreams. While Michael practiced marksmanship at 12, I was dismantling our home computer to see how it worked. When he memorized naval battle formations, I was teaching myself coding languages from library books. My father watched these interests grow like someone watching weeds overtake a garden, with increasing concern and occasional attempts to redirect me toward more suitable pursuits. "Computers are just a fad, Emma," he'd say, closing my programming book as he walked past. "Focus on something that builds character." I remember the first time I showed him something I'd built, a simple program that could break basic encryption. I was 14, had worked on it for months, staying up late. After everyone went to bed, I called him into my room one evening, nervous but excited. "Dad, look what I made," I said, demonstrating how it worked. "It can decode messages faster than the standard military algorithm." He watched for exactly 47 seconds. I counted them. Then he patted my shoulder and said, "That's cute, honey. But real security systems are built by professionals with years of training. Maybe show your mother, she might understand it better." That night, I didn't cry. Instead, I stayed up until 3 a.m. making my program run twice as fast, just to prove something to myself that no one else would ever see. High school became a careful performance. I played the role of normal teenager while secretly preparing for a future my family couldn't imagine. I joined the computer club but never brought home the awards I won. I took advanced placement classes in mathematics and computer science but downplayed my grades at dinner. I started running before dawn, building my endurance, strengthening my core, not because anyone expected me to, but because I had a plan that required physical discipline as much as mental. By senior year, while my classmates were posting college acceptance letters on social media, I was submitting my application to the Naval Academy in secret. My father had connections there, had given speeches, attended ceremonies, knew half the commanding officers by name, but I never asked for his help. Never even told him I was applying. The acceptance letter came on a Tuesday. I stared at it for hours in my bedroom, running my fingers over the embossed seal, trying to imagine the moment I would show my family. Would they be proud? Surprised? Would they finally see me? That night at dinner, I placed the envelope beside my father's plate without a word. He opened it casually, as if it were just another piece of mail. His expression shifted as he read, confusion, then surprise, then something harder to define. "Annapolis," he said finally, looking up at me. "You applied to the Naval Academy?" My mother stopped mid-bite. Michael froze with his glass halfway to his mouth. "I got in," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. The silence stretched for 5 seconds. 10. Then my father laughed, not cruelly, but with genuine amusement, as if I'd told a particularly good joke. "Emma, honey," he said, folding the letter and sliding it back across the table, "the academy isn't some summer camp. It breaks people, strong people. Men who've been preparing their whole lives." "I've been preparing too," I said. He shook his head. "You don't understand what you're getting into. The physical demands alone." "I've been training for a year," I interrupted. I can do 50 push-ups, run 6 miles under 45 minutes, and swim 2 miles without stopping. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. That's when his expression changed, from dismissive to something closer to concern. As if he was seeing a problem that needed solving rather than a dream that needed nurturing. "Why would you want this?" he asked. "This isn't your path, Emma. This isn't what you're meant for." Before I could answer, he pulled out his wallet and placed a crisp $100 bill on the table between us. He turned to Michael, who was watching with uncomfortable fascination. 20 says she doesn't make it past plebe summer, my father said. Michael hesitated, glancing at me, then back at our father. "That's not fair, Dad." 40 says she calls home crying by week 3, my father continued as if Michael hadn't spoken. My mother reached for my hand across the table. "Sweetheart, you're so smart. You could do anything, teaching, research, something safe. You don't need to prove anything." I looked at each of them, my father betting against me, my brother's uncomfortable silence, my mother's gentle discouragement. Something inside me that had been bending for years finally straightened. "I'm going," I said. 2 words, but they changed everything. My father nodded once, as if confirming something he'd always suspected. "We'll see." They didn't drive me to Annapolis. Said the traffic would be terrible, the goodbyes too difficult. I took a Greyhound bus instead, watching through the window as my neighborhood faded behind me. 6 hours with nothing but my thoughts and a duffel bag containing everything I thought I would need. I was wrong about what I needed. The academy required more, and less, than I had imagined. From the moment I stepped onto the grounds, everything became noise and motion and discipline. Upperclassmen shouting orders. New plebes scrambling to obey. Bodies moving in formation. The rhythm of boots hitting pavement in perfect synchronization. The first week nearly broke me, not because I couldn't handle the physical demands, but because I realized how much of myself I would need to surrender. My individuality. My private thoughts. My habit of solving problems my own way. Everything became about the group, the unit, the collective success. It didn't take long for the whispers to start. "Thompson? As in Admiral Thompson? Must be here on legacy. Heard her dad pulled strings. Bet she doesn't last the month." I let them talk. Let them assume I was there because of my father's name rather than in spite of it. The truth would show in my performance. Except that performance became increasingly difficult. My bunk was mysteriously short-sheeted 3 times in the first month. My uniform disappeared from my locker the night before inspection. During rifle training, I discovered my weapon sights had been subtly misaligned, not enough to be obvious, just enough to make my shots consistently off target. I reported these incidents once, early on. The commanding officer looked at me with thinly veiled contempt. "Thompson, if you're looking for special treatment because of your father's rank." "No, sir," I interrupted, then immediately regretted it as his expression hardened. "Then I suggest you learn to secure your belongings and check your equipment. Like every other plebe." Dismissed. I didn't report problems after that. Instead, I became vigilant. I checked my gear obsessively. Slept less so I could guard my things. Worked twice as hard to compensate for sabotage I couldn't always prevent. The isolation was worse than the harassment. Most plebes formed tight bonds through shared hardship, but I remained on the outside. The admiral's daughter who many believed didn't deserve her place. I ate alone. Trained alone when possible. Spent my free time, what little there was, studying in corners where I wouldn't be noticed. Then came the cyber simulation exercise. 8 weeks into training, all plebes were required to participate in a basic security breach scenario. The objective was simple: identify and neutralize a simulated cyber threat within a controlled network environment. This was my element. For the first time since arriving, I felt confident, almost comfortable. I sat at my assigned station, fingers hovering over the keyboard, waiting for the exercise to begin. The countdown started. The simulation launched. I immediately detected patterns in the attack that others missed, began implementing countermeasures that weren't in the standard protocol but would be more effective. Then it happened. A power surge, later determined to be deliberate, hit my station. The console exploded in sparks. The force knocked me backward, chair and all. Pain shot through my right arm as I landed awkwardly, wrist twisted beneath me. Through the chaos that followed, medical personnel rushing in, exercise supervisors shouting orders, plebes being evacuated, I focused on only one thought: this wasn't an accident. The infirmary diagnosis was severe: fractured wrist, nerve damage, potential long-term mobility issues. The doctor, a lieutenant commander with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner, laid out my options with clinical detachment. Best case scenario, surgery, 3 months of rehabilitation, limited duty for another 3 after that. Worst case, permanent nerve damage, medical discharge. I stared at the ceiling, refusing to let the tears gathering behind my eyes fall. Where anyone could see them. And if I refuse surgery? I asked. Then you'll heal poorly, with chronic pain and limited function. Your naval career would be effectively over before it began. That night, alone in the infirmary bed, I finally allowed myself one moment of doubt. Just one. I wondered if my father had been right, if I had been fooling myself all along. If this was the universe's way of correcting a mistake, putting me back on the path I was meant for. I wrote home the next day, not asking for help or sympathy, just informing them of what had happened. A week passed. Then another. No response. In the 3rd week, as I was contemplating surgery options, the infirmary door opened. I expected a nurse or doctor. Instead, Commander Sarah Leavitt walked in, head of Naval Cyber Operations Training, known for her brilliance and uncompromising standards. I had seen her from a distance at academy functions but had never spoken to her. She didn't smile. Didn't introduce herself. Simply dropped a file folder on my bed and said, 3 encryption challenges. Solve them by Monday. I stared at her, then at the folder, then at my splinted wrist. Ma'am? Your wrist is injured, plebe Thompson, not your brain. She pointed to the folder. Monday. She turned to leave, then paused at the door. And? Thompson? Don't waste my time with standard solutions. I can get those from any 3rd year. The door closed behind her, leaving me with 3 of the most complex encryption scenarios I had ever seen. I spent that weekend working one-handed, scribbling notes, running calculations, developing approaches that pushed beyond everything I had learned so far. Monday came. Commander Leavitt returned, reviewed my solutions in silence, then nodded once. You'll do, she said. Then she handed me another folder, twice as thick. Wednesday. This became our routine. Twice weekly, she would bring new challenges, each more difficult than the last. Never praise, rarely criticism, just increasingly complex problems that required everything I had. Meanwhile, I underwent surgery. Began physical therapy. Pushed through pain that sometimes left me nauseated and lightheaded. All while continuing to solve Commander Leavitt's impossible puzzles. One evening, as I was struggling through a particularly difficult scenario with my still healing wrist throbbing, I asked her why. Why these challenges? Why me? She looked up from the notes she was reviewing, her expression unchanged. Because talent without pressure is wasted potential. The Navy doesn't need more adequate officers, Thompson. It needs exceptional ones. And you think I could be exceptional? I couldn't keep the surprise from my voice. I think you haven't given yourself permission to find out. She gathered her papers. Your solutions are getting predictable. Push harder. 6 months later, I returned to full training, physically smaller after the recovery period, but mentally sharper. My right hand would never be as strong as before, but I had learned to compensate. Had discovered new ways to approach old problems. Commander Leavitt's training continued alongside my regular academy curriculum. By my 2nd year, I was developing security protocols that caught the attention of instructors. By my 3rd, I was being pulled into classified briefings that other midshipmen weren't privy to. I graduated in the top 3% of my class. My family attended the ceremony. My father in his full admiral's uniform, my mother in navy blue with her string of pearls, Michael standing tall in his lieutenant's uniform. They clapped politely when my name was called, their expressions a mixture of surprise and cautious pride. At the reception afterward, my father shook my hand formally, as if meeting a colleague rather than embracing a daughter. You proved me wrong, he said, his tone suggesting this was an uncommon occurrence. But the real Navy is different from the academy. That's where we'll see what you're truly made of. I smiled without warmth. Yes, sir. What I didn't tell him, what I had been instructed not to tell anyone, was that my orders had already come through. I wasn't heading to a ship or standard shore duty. I was being assigned directly to Naval Intelligence's Cyber Operations Division, a posting that typically required years of specialized training and experience. Commander Leavitt, now Captain Leavitt, had personally requested me. She thinks differently, I overheard her telling another officer. We need different if we're going to stay ahead. The next 5 years passed in a blur of classified operations, rapid promotions, and deepening silence between me and my family. I called home monthly at first, then quarterly, then only on holidays. The conversations followed a predictable pattern. My mother, how are you, sweetheart? Eating enough? Meeting anyone special? Me, I'm fine, Mom. Work is good. Busy. My father, still with that computer unit? Any chance of a real assignment soon? Me, my assignment is real, Dad. My father, you know what I mean. Something that matters. I stopped trying to explain what I did or why it mattered. Stopped mentioning promotions or commendations. Stopped sharing anything beyond the most superficial details of my life. Meanwhile, Michael's career flourished in ways my family understood and celebrated. He completed SEAL training, led missions in active combat zones, came home with visible medals and stories he could actually share at dinner parties. I led a team that intercepted a state-sponsored cyber attack targeting critical infrastructure. We worked for 72 hours straight, no sleep, barely eating, racing against hackers who were systematically dismantling security protocols that protected power grids, water treatment facilities, and air traffic control systems. When it was over, when we had not only stopped the attack but traced it back to its source, providing intelligence that would prevent similar attacks in the future, my commanding officer shook my hand and said simply, "Good work, Thompson. You saved lives today." I called home that night, still riding the adrenaline high of what we had accomplished. My mother answered, "Emma, what a nice surprise. Michael just got back from deployment. He's right here, let me put you on speaker." I heard the click, then my brother's voice. "Hey, sis. Perfect timing. I was just telling Mom and Dad about our extraction operation in the Gulf." "That's great, Michael," I said. Then, taking a breath, "Actually, I wanted to share something too. My team just stopped a cyber attack that could have affected critical infrastructure across 3 states." That's nice, dear," my mother interrupted. "Is it something you can put on your resume when you decide to leave the service? I was telling Martha Jenkins just yesterday that you'd make an excellent IT consultant." My father's voice came through next. "Speaking of careers, Michael's being considered for early promotion to lieutenant commander. His CO says he's on the fastest track he's seen in years." The conversation moved on, flowing around my achievement like water around a stone, leaving it untouched and unremarked upon. I hung up 30 minutes later and stood in my apartment, phone still in hand, suddenly seeing with perfect clarity what I had been trying to ignore for years. They would never understand. Never value what I did. Never see me as I truly was. It wasn't malice. It wasn't even intentional dismissal. They simply lacked the framework to recognize achievement that didn't match their predetermined idea of what success looked like. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. I stopped trying to translate my world into terms they could understand. Stopped seeking validation from people who weren't equipped to give it. Stopped calling except on major holidays. I poured everything into my work instead. Took on the most challenging assignments. Built a reputation for solving problems others couldn't even properly define. Rose through the ranks faster than anyone expected. By my 30th birthday, I had achieved the rank of major, a milestone that would have impressed my family if it had come through conventional channels. But because my promotions happened within the shadowy world of cyber operations, because the commendations couldn't be displayed or discussed, they remained unimpressed. The invitation arrived by mail, thick cream-colored paper with formal military lettering. Lieutenant Michael Thompson would be receiving a special commendation at Naval Base San Diego, with full honors and ceremony. Family was encouraged to attend. I let the invitation sit on my kitchen counter for days, alternately ignoring it and staring at it when I couldn't sleep. Part of me wanted to skip it entirely, to send a polite excuse and avoid another exercise in invisibility. But another part, the part that still remembered being that girl desperate for her family's recognition, couldn't let go. My partner, Nathan, watched me deliberate with quiet concern. We had met 3 years earlier at a cross-departmental security briefing. He was Air Force intelligence, I was Navy. We recognized something in each other immediately, the same drive, the same experience of operating in spaces that few understood. "You don't owe them your presence," he said one evening, watching me pick up the invitation for the dozenth time. "I know," I replied. "But he's still my brother." "Then go as yourself," Nathan said. "Not as the person they expect you to be." I thought about his words for a long time. Going as myself would mean wearing my uniform, displaying the rank and insignia I had earned. It would mean making visible everything they had chosen not to see. In the end, I chose a middle path. I would attend, but not in uniform. Not as Major Thompson, but simply as Emma, Michael's sister, there to support his achievement. I selected a conservative navy blue dress, pearl earrings that had been my grandmother's, low heels that wouldn't draw attention. The ceremony was exactly as I expected, formal, scripted, heavy with tradition and symbolism. My parents sat in the front row, my father ramrod straight in his civilian suit that somehow still looked like a uniform, my mother elegant in cream silk, both of them beaming with uncomplicated pride. I sat halfway back, anonymous among the crowd of military families and officials. No one recognized me. No one approached. I was exactly what I appeared to be, just another attendee, unremarkable and unnoticed. The proceedings began with the usual protocol. Colors presented. National anthem. Introductory remarks by the base commander. Then the presentation of commendations. Michael stood at attention on stage, his posture perfect, his uniform immaculate. Even from a distance, I could see the pride in his expression, the satisfaction of being publicly recognized for achievements that our family had always valued. General Harris approached the podium, a towering figure with iron gray hair and the kind of presence that commanded attention without effort. He began speaking about courage, about leadership, about the qualities that defined exceptional service. Standard ceremony language, delivered with practiced precision. Then something changed. His rhythm faltered. His gaze, which had been sweeping the audience in the formal pattern of an experienced speaker, stopped. On me. For a moment, just a heartbeat, we locked eyes across the crowded auditorium. I saw recognition flicker across his face, followed by something that looked almost like surprise. He recovered smoothly, continuing his speech without further hesitation. But I felt a shift in the air, a subtle change in the energy of the room that only I seemed to notice. The commendation was presented. Applause rose and fell. The ceremony concluded with the expected formalities. People began to move, to gather. In small conversational groups, to approach the stage where Michael was accepting congratulations. I stood, preparing to slip out quietly before my family spotted me. That's when I heard it, my name, spoken in the unmistakable voice of authority that only decades of military command can produce. Major Thompson. Emma Thompson. General Harris was walking directly toward me, moving through the crowd with purpose. People stepped aside automatically, creating a path. All conversation in our vicinity stopped. He stopped 3 feet away from me and saluted crisply. Major. I didn't expect to see you here. I returned the salute automatically, years of training overriding my civilian dress. General Harris. Your operation in Singapore last month. He didn't phrase it as a question. Outstanding work. The intelligence your team gathered has altered our entire regional strategy. I was aware of the silence spreading outward from where we stood, of heads turning, of whispered questions passing from person to person. Thank you, sir, I said. We had excellent support from your division. I've been meaning to contact you directly. He reached into his pocket and produced a business card. The Joint Task Force needs someone with your unique perspective. When you return to Washington, call my office. We should discuss possibilities. Before I could respond, another voice cut through the moment, my father's, sharp with confusion. Major? Emma? He stood 10 feet away, my mother beside him, both staring as if I had suddenly transformed into someone they didn't recognize. Because, in a way, I had. Dad, I acknowledged with a small nod. Mom. General Harris looked between us, comprehension dawning in his expression. Admiral Thompson. I wasn't aware Major Thompson was your daughter. You must be very proud of her achievements. My father's mouth opened, closed, opened again. For perhaps the first time in his life, he seemed entirely at a loss for words. My mother found her voice first. Major, she repeated, the words sounding foreign on her tongue. Emma, what is he talking about? I took a breath, suddenly aware that I was standing at a crossroads, not just in this moment, but in every interaction with my family that would follow. I could minimize it, deflect, change the subject. Or I could finally, after all these years, be fully seen. I was promoted 18 months ago, Mom, I said quietly. I lead the Joint Cyber Operations Task Force. We specialize in counterintelligence and infrastructure protection. Michael appeared at our father's side, his expression cycling through confusion, disbelief, and something harder to define, perhaps the first stirrings of understanding. Cyber operations? My father repeated, his tone suggesting he was trying to fit this information into a worldview that had no space for it. You work with computers? General Harris raised an eyebrow. Admiral, your daughter's unit is responsible for preventing 3 major attacks on U.S. infrastructure in the past year alone. The president personally recognized her team last quarter. The silence that followed felt physical, as if the air itself had solidified around us. I watched my family's faces as they tried to reconcile the daughter they thought they knew with the officer standing before them. Why didn't you tell us? My mother finally asked, her voice small. I looked at my mother, searching for the right words to explain years of silence. The crowded ceremony hall suddenly felt too small, too public for this moment. I tried to tell you, I said quietly. Many times. But you never seemed interested in hearing it. My father's face flushed. That's ridiculous. We've always supported your career. No, I corrected him gently, you've always tolerated my career. There's a difference. General Harris, sensing the tension, tactfully excused himself with another nod in my direction. Major Thompson, I'll expect your call next week. As he walked away, Michael stepped forward, his expression a mixture of confusion and dawning realization. The president recognized you, he asked. And you didn't tell us? I met his gaze directly. Would it have mattered? In our house, real service has always meant ships in combat zones and visible medals. What I do happens in secured rooms with no windows. There are no photographs, no ceremonies most of the time, no stories I can share over dinner. My father started to speak, then stopped, his military discipline finally forcing him to consider his words before delivering them. Let's not do this here, my mother said, glancing around at the curious onlookers. People are watching. They've always been watching, I replied. That's part of the problem. But I nodded in agreement. This conversation needed privacy, not an audience of strangers. We found an empty conference room down a quiet hallway. My father closed the door behind us with the precise click of someone accustomed to controlling his environment. My mother perched on the edge of a chair, back straight, hands clasped tightly in her lap. Michael leaned against the wall, arms crossed, still processing. Explain, my father said. It wasn't a request. I took a deep breath. What exactly would you like me to explain, Dad? My rank? My job? Or the fact that I stopped sharing my life with you because you made it clear it wasn't the kind of life you valued? That's unfair, he said, but the usual authority in his voice had diminished. Is it? I asked. Every time I tried to tell you about my work, you changed the subject or compared it to Michael's. When I called after stopping that infrastructure attack, you talked over me to discuss Michael's promotion prospects. My mother shook her head. We didn't know it was important, Emma. You never said. I shouldn't have had to spell it out, I said. You never asked Michael to justify why his achievements mattered. You just assumed they did. Michael pushed away from the wall. Hold on. Don't put this on me. I'm not, I assured him. This isn't about you, Michael. It's about a family dynamic that made it impossible for me to be seen as I am. My father paced the small room, processing this information with the same methodical approach he'd applied to military strategy throughout his career. So you've been, what, leading some kind of secret cyber unit all this time? While we thought you were just doing basic IT work? Not secret, I corrected. Classified. And yes, I've spent the last 8 years building and leading teams that protect our digital infrastructure from state-sponsored attacks. We've prevented power grid failures, water system contaminations, and financial system collapses. And you're good at it? He asked, struggling to find the right question. Despite everything, I laughed, a short, surprised sound. Yes, Dad. I'm very good at it. That's why I'm a major at 32. My mother stood suddenly. All these years, she said, her voice wavering. All these years we've been proud of the wrong things. Mom, no, let me finish. We were proud when you graduated from the academy because you proved you could do something hard. We were proud when you stayed in the service because it showed commitment. But we never understood what you were committed to. We never tried to. She crossed the room and took my hands in hers. I'm sorry, Emma. I'm so sorry we didn't see you. The simple apology, so unexpected, so genuine, caught me off guard. I felt tears threatening and blinked them back. Military officers don't cry in conference rooms, not even when decades of misunderstanding begin to unravel. My father remained silent, his expression unreadable. Michael studied the floor, then looked up with new clarity in his eyes. The thing is, he said slowly, I always knew you were smart. Smarter than me. When we were kids, you fixed the computer when no one else could. You solved puzzles in half the time it took me. But I never connected that to this. He gestured vaguely. To being a different kind of warrior. That's what we are, I said. Different kinds of warriors. Your battlefield is physical. Mine is digital. But we're both defending the same thing. My father finally spoke, his voice rougher than usual. I didn't have a framework for understanding what you do. In my day, computers were for administration, not combat. I know, I said. But that didn't stop you from dismissing it. He flinched slightly at the directness of my words. Admiral Thompson wasn't accustomed to being challenged, especially by his daughter. You're right, he said, surprising me. I made assumptions based on my own limited perspective. That was incorrect. Coming from my father, this admission was the equivalent of a full emotional breakdown from someone else. I felt something shift between us, not forgiveness exactly, not yet, but the possibility of it. So what happens now? Michael asked, always the pragmatist. I looked at each of them, my mother with her dawning comprehension, my father struggling to realign his understanding of his daughter, my brother seeing me clearly perhaps for the first time. Now we start over, I said. Not by forgetting the past, but by building something new from here. Will you tell us about your work? My mother asked hesitantly. What you can, I mean. Yes, I promised. And I'll try to translate the technical aspects into terms that make sense. But you have to promise to actually listen. My father straightened, old habits reasserting themselves. We always listen. No, I corrected gently, you always hear. There's a difference. For a moment, I thought he might argue. Then his expression softened fractionally. Fair assessment. I'll work on that. The door opened suddenly, and a young lieutenant appeared, looking flustered. Excuse me, sir, ma'am, he said, nodding to my parents. Then he turned to me. Major Thompson? There's an urgent call for you from Cybercom. They say it's critical. I wasn't surprised. The digital battlefield never respected personal moments. Thank you, Lieutenant. I'll be right there. As he left, I turned back to my family. Duty calls. Of course, my father said automatically. Then, with visible effort, is it something serious? It was such a small question, such a normal thing to ask, but it represented something monumental, my father taking an interest in my work without prompting, without comparison to something he understood better. Probably, I admitted. These calls usually are. But that's all I can say. He nodded, military to military. Go. Do what you need to do. As I headed for the door, my mother called after me. Emma? When this is over, dinner? All of us? I paused, hand on the doorknob. I'd like that. The urgent call turned out to be exactly as serious as I'd expected, a coordinated attempt to breach several classified defense networks simultaneously. My team and I spent the next 36 hours in a windowless command center, tracking digital fingerprints, establishing countermeasures, and coordinating with physical security teams around the country. When it was finally contained, I found myself sitting alone in my temporary office at the San Diego base, exhaustion making my vision blur around the edges. I checked my phone for the first time in a day and a half. 3 missed calls from my mother. 2 text messages from Michael. And, most surprisingly, an email from my father. The email was brief, formal, and entirely characteristic. Emma, your mother tells me you're still working on the situation. I hope it resolves favorably. We have dinner reservations tomorrow at 7 p.m. at Harborview if you're available by then. Michael will be there. I've been doing some reading about cyber operations. I have questions when you have time. Dad, no emotional declarations. No elaborate apologies. Just acknowledgement, interest, and an invitation. From my father, it was practically a revolution. I smiled despite my exhaustion and typed a quick reply, Dad, situation contained. We'll make dinner. Looking forward to your questions. Emma, the following evening, I arrived at the restaurant 15 minutes early, a habit drilled into me at the academy and reinforced throughout my military career. I had taken time to change from my uniform into civilian clothes, a simple black dress, my grandmother's pearls again, low heels. The hostess led me to a private table near the back where my family was already seated. They all stood as I approached, military courtesy extending even to this civilian setting. But there was something different in their posture, something I couldn't immediately identify. Then I realized, they were standing for me not out of obligation or habit, but out of respect. The kind of respect you give to someone whose position you acknowledge, whose achievements you recognize. Emma, my father said, pulling out my chair. Glad you could make it. Is everything resolved? My mother asked carefully, clearly. Trying to find the right vocabulary for a world she was just beginning to understand. For now, I said, accepting the menu from the waiter. These situations are never permanently resolved. It's more like an ongoing chess match. Against who? Michael asked, then quickly added, or is that classified? I appreciated his question, both the interest it showed and his awareness of boundaries. The specific actors are classified. Yes. But I can say they're persistent and well-resourced. My father cleared his throat. I've been reading about the increase in state-sponsored cyber attacks. The reports are concerning. They should be, I agreed. The nature of warfare is changing. Physical battles are just one front now. That's what I'm beginning to understand, he said. The article I read suggested that a coordinated cyber attack could potentially cause more damage than conventional weapons in certain scenarios. I looked at him with new appreciation. He hadn't just made a token effort, he had actually educated himself, had tried to understand the world I operated in. That's accurate, I confirmed. If someone takes down the power grid during a winter storm, for instance, the casualty count could exceed many conventional attacks. If financial systems are compromised, the economic damage could be catastrophic. And that's what you prevent, my mother said, not a question but a statement of recognition. My team and I, yes. Along with many others. The conversation paused. As we ordered dinner. When the waiter left, Michael leaned forward, his expression curious. What's it like, he asked. Your version of combat. I considered his question carefully. Different from yours in many ways. We're not dodging bullets or navigating hostile terrain, at least not physically. But there are similarities too. The pressure. The stakes. The knowledge that people's lives depend on your decisions. The adrenaline, he suggested. Definitely the adrenaline, I agreed with a smile. When you're tracking an active intrusion, watching someone move through systems in real time, trying to predict their next move while simultaneously working to cut them off, it's intense. My father was listening intently, his expression thoughtful. How do you know when you've won? In conventional warfare, there are clear objectives, territory gained or lost, enemies captured or neutralized. It was such a military question, so characteristic of his training and experience. But the fact that he was applying his framework to my world rather than dismissing it represented tremendous progress. Digital victory is more elusive, I explained. Sometimes it's clear, an attack is stopped, a system remains secure. But often it's more ambiguous. We might repel an intrusion but know they'll be back with a new approach. We might secure one vulnerability only to discover 3 more. It's less about winning decisively and more about maintaining persistent advantage. He nodded slowly, processing this. Asymmetrical warfare. Exactly, I said, surprised and pleased by his understanding. And your team, my mother interjected. What are they like? This question, so simple, so human, touched me unexpectedly. She wanted to know about the people in my life, the relationships that shaped my days. It was the kind of question you ask when you genuinely want to understand someone's world. They're brilliant, I said, feeling a surge of pride. Different from traditional military personnel in some ways, more diverse backgrounds, more unconventional thinking. But they have the same core dedication, the same willingness to sacrifice for the mission. Do they know who your father is? Michael asked, a hint of his old teasing in his voice. I laughed. Some might, but it doesn't matter in our world. Digital skills don't care about your pedigree. Dinner arrived, temporarily pausing our conversation. As we ate, I found myself relaxing in a way I rarely did with my family. For the first time in years, perhaps ever, I wasn't editing myself, wasn't carefully selecting which parts of my life to share and which to conceal. There's something I've been wondering, my father said eventually, setting down his fork. How did you end up in cyber operations? At the academy, everyone follows a standard track initially. The question brought me back to memories I hadn't revisited in years. Do you remember my wrist injury during plebe year? He frowned slightly. The training accident? Your mother mentioned it. It wasn't an accident, I said quietly. Someone tampered with my equipment. The investigation was inconclusive, but the timing was too convenient. My mother gasped softly. Emma, you never told us. Would it have mattered? I asked, not unkindly. Dad had already bet against me making it through training. Telling you would have seemed like making excuses. My father's expression darkened. I would have intervened. That's exactly why I didn't tell you, I said. I needed to solve my own problems. So what happened? Michael prompted. Commander Levitt happened, I said, smiling at the memory. She was leading the cyber operations division then. She came to my hospital room and dropped a file of encryption challenges on my bed. Told me my brain wasn't injured, just my wrist. Sounds harsh, my mother commented. It was exactly what I needed, I countered. She didn't treat me like I was broken or fragile. She pushed me to focus on what I could do rather than what I couldn't. While I was recovering physically, she was training me mentally, harder problems, tighter deadlines, higher stakes. She saw your potential, my father said softly. She did, I agreed. And she created a path for me that played to my strengths rather than highlighting my limitations. Like what you're doing now, Michael observed. Finding different ways to serve. I nodded, appreciating his insight. Exactly. There's no single definition of service, no one way to be valuable. The military needs all kinds of warriors. Those who fight with weapons and those who fight with code. My father was quiet for a moment, then said something that stunned me. I was wrong about you, Emma. Wrong in ways I'm only beginning to understand. The simple admission, so uncharacteristic, so powerful coming from him, left me momentarily speechless. We all were, my mother added, reaching across the table to take my hand. We measured you against a standard that never fit. But you measured yourself correctly, Michael said. You knew who you were even when we didn't see it. I felt something tight and long-held loosening in my chest. I didn't always know. There were times I doubted, times I wondered if maybe you were right about me. But you kept going anyway, my father said, and there was unmistakable pride in his voice now. That's the true mark of strength, not the absence of doubt, but the persistence to move forward despite it. We finished dinner and lingered over coffee, the conversation flowing more naturally than it ever had before. We talked about my current projects, in appropriately vague terms, about Michael's next deployment, about my parents' plans to finally take the European vacation they'd been postponing for years. As the evening wound down, my father asked one final question. If you could go back and change anything, tell us differently, help us understand sooner, would you? I considered this carefully. No, I said finally. The path wasn't easy, but it shaped me, made me resilient, taught me to validate myself rather than seeking external approval. Those lessons have been valuable in my career and my life. He nodded, understanding in his eyes. The strongest steel is forged in the hottest fire. Something like that, I agreed with a small smile. Outside the restaurant, as we prepared to go our separate ways, my mother hugged me tightly. I'm so proud of you, she whispered. Not just for what you've achieved, but for who you've become despite our mistakes. Michael embraced me next. Next time you save the world, sis, give me a call. Even if I don't understand all the details. I will, I promised. My father stood before me, formal as always, but something had shifted in his posture, a new awareness, a different kind of respect. Major Thompson, he said, offering a crisp salute. I returned it with equal precision. Admiral. Then he did something unprecedented, he pulled me into a brief but firm embrace. And more importantly, Emma. My daughter. Who serves her country. With honor in ways I never imagined possible. As I drove back to my hotel that night, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought me here. From the little girl trying to prove herself in a family that couldn't see her, to the officer whose work happened in shadows but changed the world nonetheless. The road hadn't been straight. The recognition hadn't come easily or from the sources I once thought mattered most. But in finding my own path, in refusing to be limited by others' definitions of success or service, I had discovered something powerful, the ability to define my own value. 2 months later, a package arrived. At my office in Washington. Inside was a small, polished wooden box with the Navy insignia inlaid in silver on the lid. When I opened it, I found my father's Bronze Star, the medal he had received for valor during the Gulf War, the one that had occupied the place of honor in our family home for as long as I could remember. A handwritten note accompanied it. Emma, some battles are fought in distant lands, with weapons we can see and wounds that leave visible scars. Others are fought in quiet rooms, with minds as sharp as any blade, preventing wounds that might otherwise devastate countless lives. Both require courage. Both deserve honor. This medal has always represented the highest values of service to me. It now belongs with you, a different kind of warrior, but one whose courage and commitment stand equal to any I have known. With pride and respect, Dad, I placed the box on my desk, where it remains today, not as a symbol of my father's achievement, but as a reminder that recognition comes in many forms, often when we least expect it. And that the most important validation isn't what others see in us, but what we know to be true about ourselves. In the digital age, not all warriors carry weapons. Not all battles leave physical scars. Not all victories are celebrated with parades. But the courage, the sacrifice, the commitment to something larger than ourselves, these remain constant across all fields of service. I may not have followed the path my family expected, but I found the one I was meant to walk. And in doing so, I redefined what it means to be a Thompson, not by rejecting our legacy of service, but by expanding it to include new frontiers, new challenges, new ways of protecting what matters most. Sometimes the greatest act of courage isn't charging into battle, but charting your own course when no one else believes in the destination. Sometimes the most important victories are the ones no one sees, except those with the wisdom to look beyond the surface, to recognize strength in all its varied forms. 6 months after that transformative dinner with my family, I found myself standing in a secure briefing room deep within the Pentagon. The walls were bare except for a digital screen displaying a global map marked with pulsing red indicators, each representing a potential cyber threat to American infrastructure. The room was silent except for the faint hum of air conditioning, and the occasional buzz of my phone receiving encrypted messages from my team. I was waiting for the Secretary of Defense. Not as an anonymous officer, not as someone's daughter, but as Major Emma Thompson, the specialist called in to address a situation that had escalated beyond conventional solutions. When the door finally opened, 4 people entered, the secretary, 2 generals I recognized from previous briefings, and my father. I maintained my professional composure, but couldn't help feeling a flutter of surprise. Admiral Thompson, though retired, was occasionally brought in as a consultant on strategic matters. I hadn't known he would be part of this meeting. He gave me a small nod, professional, appropriate for the setting, but with a warmth in his eyes that spoke of our repaired relationship. Major Thompson, the secretary began without preamble, we have a situation that requires your unique expertise. Yes, sir, I responded, turning my attention to the briefing materials being distributed. I've reviewed the preliminary data. Then you understand why we've called you in, one of the generals said. This isn't just another intrusion attempt. The targeting patterns suggest something more strategic. I nodded, scanning the documents with practiced efficiency. They're mapping vulnerabilities in our power grid, water treatment facilities, and transportation systems simultaneously. This isn't about immediate disruption, it's preparation for something larger. Exactly, the secretary confirmed. The question is, what are we dealing with? State actors? Terrorists? Some combination? And how do we respond? Added the other general. Conventional deterrence doesn't work when we can't definitively attribute the attack. I looked up from the papers. With respect, sir, we're asking the wrong questions. Who they are matters less than what they want and how they operate. Digital fingerprints can be disguised, but behavioral patterns can't be hidden as easily. My father spoke for the first time. Elaborate, Major. It was strange hearing him address me by rank, but I appreciated his professionalism. This wasn't the time for family dynamics. The attacks show consistent patterns, I explained, moving to the digital display and highlighting specific data points. Precision timing. Methodical progression. They're not opportunistic, they're following a predetermined sequence. I pulled up additional screens showing code fragments and access attempt patterns. More importantly, they're learning from each failure, adapting their approach rather than simply trying brute force methods. That suggests sophisticated actors with patience and resources. So we're looking at a nation-state, one of the generals concluded. Not necessarily, I countered. The techniques suggest training and resources, yes, but the targets are unusual for typical state actors. They're focusing on systems that would cause maximum civilian disruption rather than military or intelligence assets. I turned to face the group fully. Gentlemen, I believe we're looking at a hybrid threat, state-trained operators working with or for non-state actors. They want chaos, not conquest. The room fell silent as they absorbed this assessment. The secretary looked at me with new interest. What do you propose, Major? A three-pronged approach, I said without hesitation. First, we harden the targeted systems immediately, not just with standard protocols, but with adaptive defenses that can learn and respond to evolving threats. I moved back to the map display, highlighting specific regions. Second, we deploy surveillance honeypots, systems that appear vulnerable but are actually monitoring stations that will help us identify their methods and possibly their origins. And third, my father prompted. We go on the offensive, I said firmly. Not with conventional cyber attacks, but with a targeted campaign to disrupt their command and control infrastructure. We make it harder for them to coordinate, force them to expose more of their network as they try to maintain operations. The secretary exchanged glances with the generals. That's an aggressive posture, Major. There are diplomatic considerations. With respect, sir, diplomacy works best from a position of strength. Right now, they believe they're invisible, untouchable. We need to change that calculation. My father was watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read, professional assessment mixed with something more personal. The Major's strategy has merit, he said finally. It balances immediate protection with longer-term intelligence gathering and disruption. It's the kind of asymmetrical response this threat requires. The secretary nodded slowly. How quickly can you implement this, Major Thompson? My team can begin immediately, I replied. Phase 1 within 24 hours, Phase 2 within 72. Phase 3 would require additional authorizations. You'll have them, he assured me. Keep me updated directly. As the meeting concluded and the others filed out, my father lingered behind. When we were alone, his formal demeanor softened slightly. Good assessment, he said simply. Thank you, sir. He hesitated, then added, your approach, it wasn't conventional military thinking. No, I agreed. It wasn't. That's why it will work, he said. The most dangerous threats often come from unexpected directions. So must the most effective defenses. Coming from him, a man who had spent decades in traditional military operations, this represented a profound shift in perspective. When did you figure that out? I asked, genuinely curious. He smiled slightly. About 6 months ago, when I realized my daughter had been fighting battles I couldn't even see, much less understand. Before I could respond, his professional manner returned. I should let you get to work. Lives depend on it. Yes, sir. I replied, watching him leave with a new appreciation for how far we'd both come. The next 72 hours were a blur of activity. My team operated from a secure command center, coordinating with cybersecurity units across multiple agencies and military branches. We slept in shifts on cots set up in adjacent rooms, ate meals at our workstations, and communicated through secure channels that were constantly being reconfigured to prevent interception. This wasn't the glamorous version of warfare depicted in movies, no dramatic countdowns, no single heroic moment that saved the day. Instead, it was meticulous, exhausting work. Identifying vulnerabilities, patching systems, setting traps, analyzing data, adjusting strategies based on the adversary's responses. On the third day, as I was reviewing attack pattern analyses with my second-in-command, Lisa Chen, an alert flashed across our main screen. One of our honeypots had been triggered, capturing valuable data about the attacker's methods. "We've got something," Lisa said, fingers flying across her keyboard. "They've taken the bait on the water treatment system honeypot." I moved to her station, watching as data streamed in. Track their pathway. Let's see where they go next. For the next hour, we followed their digital footprints through our fabricated system, carefully monitoring every command they issued, every file they accessed. It was like watching an intruder move through your house in slow motion, touching objects, opening drawers, revealing their intentions with every action. "They're testing the chemical control systems," Lisa observed. "Looking for ways to override safety protocols." I nodded grimly, confirming our hypothesis. "They're not after data or intelligence, they want to cause physical damage through digital means." "Major," called another analyst from across the room. "We're getting attribution markers. The command servers are bouncing signals through multiple countries, but there's a pattern emerging." I moved to his station, studying the data. "Good work, Evans. Keep tracing. I want confirmation before we take this to command." By morning, we had assembled a comprehensive picture of what we were facing, a sophisticated network of hackers with connections to a known terrorist organization, but using techniques and tools associated with a particular nation's intelligence services. The implications were disturbing but not entirely surprising. Proxy warfare had entered the digital age. With this intelligence in hand, I prepared to brief the Secretary and Joint Chiefs. As I gathered my materials, my phone buzzed with a text. Message from my mother: "Your father mentioned you're working on something important. We're proud of you, whatever it is. Stay safe. Love, Mom." Such a simple message, but it represented a sea change in our family dynamics. 6 months ago, she wouldn't have known I was involved in a critical operation. She wouldn't have connected my work with concepts like importance or safety. And she certainly wouldn't have expressed pride without qualifications. I texted back a brief but sincere "thank you. Love you too," then headed to the briefing. The presentation went smoothly. I outlined our findings, explained the threat in terms that bridged technical details with strategic implications, and proposed next steps. The room was filled with military and intelligence leaders with decades of combined experience, yet they listened to me, a relatively young female officer, with full attention and respect. When I finished, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs nodded approval. "Excellent work, Major Thompson. Your team has given us actionable intelligence and a clear path forward." "Thank you, sir. The President has been briefed on the situation," the Secretary added. "He's authorized full implementation of your countermeasures, including Phase 3 offensive operations. We'll begin immediately, sir." As I gathered my materials, the Secretary approached me directly. "Your father always said the Thompson name stood for excellence in service. Now I understand it spans more dimensions than I realized." I smiled slightly. "The battlefield has evolved, sir. So have the warriors who defend it." Over the next 2 weeks, my team executed the strategy with precision and adaptability. We hardened critical infrastructure systems, monitored adversary activities through our honeypots, and gradually implemented targeted disruptions to their command infrastructure. It wasn't a decisive victory in the traditional sense. Cyber conflicts rarely end with surrender ceremonies or peace treaties. But we successfully degraded their capabilities, identified key personnel for further monitoring, and most importantly, protected the civilian systems they had targeted. When the operation was finally downgraded from critical status, I found myself with the first opportunity in weeks to catch my breath. I sat alone in my office, staring at the now quiet threat monitors, feeling the familiar mix of exhaustion and satisfaction that follows intense operations. A knock on my door pulled me from my thoughts. It was Michael, in his naval uniform, holding a small gift bag. "Hey, sis," he said with a grin. "Thought I'd find you still at your desk." I stood to embrace him, genuinely surprised. Michael, what are you doing in Washington? Transit stop before heading to my new assignment, he explained. Dad mentioned you'd been running some major operation. Said it just wrapped up. More or less, I confirmed, gesturing for him to sit. Nothing I can really talk about, though. I figured, he said, sliding the gift bag across my desk. That's why I brought this. No questions required. Inside the bag, I found a small wooden plaque with a quote engraved in brass: "Not all warriors wear the same armor, but all serve with the same heart." Michael, I said softly, running my fingers over the inscription. This is something I should have understood a long time ago, he finished for me. We all had our blind spots, Em. Even me, maybe especially me. I was so busy playing the role of the Thompson son that I never questioned the limitations we put on you. I placed the plaque on my desk, positioning it beside the box containing our father's bronze star. We were all playing roles we thought we had to fill. The difference is, you found the courage to break out of yours, he said. Even when none of us supported you. Even when we actively discouraged you. It wasn't about courage, I corrected him. It was about necessity. I couldn't be anything other than who I am, even if that meant disappointing everyone I loved. He nodded thoughtfully. That's a different kind of courage, sis. The kind that's harder to recognize but more important. In the long run. We talked for another hour, about his upcoming deployment, about our parents' newfound interest in technology. My father had recently purchased his first smartphone and was calling me regularly with questions about the challenges of explaining our classified work to civilians. As he was leaving, Michael paused at the door. You know, the Thompson legacy is different now because of you. Bigger. Better. That wasn't my goal, I said honestly. Which is exactly why it happened, he replied with a smile. The best legacies are built by people who focus on the work, not the reputation. After he left, I sat contemplating his words and the journey that had brought me here. From the little girl taking apart radios in her bedroom to the officer leading critical national security operations. From the family disappointment to the respected professional. From invisible to seen. The path hadn't been linear or easy. There had been moments of doubt, periods of loneliness, times when I questioned whether the cost of following my own direction was too high. But sitting in my Pentagon office, surrounded by evidence of both my professional achievements and my family's belated recognition, I knew with certainty that I would make the same choices again. 3 months later, I received unexpected news. I was being considered for promotion to lieutenant colonel, a significant advancement that typically came only after years at my current rank. My commanding officer delivered the information. Personally, along with an additional surprise. You're also being nominated for the Distinguished Service Medal, he informed me. Your work on Operation Silent Shield has been recognized at the highest levels. I was momentarily speechless. The Distinguished Service Medal was one of the highest honors awarded to military personnel, usually reserved for those with decades of service or extraordinary achievements in combat operations. Sir, that's unexpected. He smiled slightly. The nature of warfare is changing, Thompson. So are the metrics by which we measure exceptional service. Your operation prevented what could have been the most devastating attack on civilian infrastructure in our history. That deserves recognition, even if the battles were fought with keyboards instead of rifles. Thank you, sir, I said, struggling to process this development. When will this be announced? The Promotion Review Board meets next month. The medal ceremony, if approved, would likely be scheduled within 90 days. You'll be notified officially soon. After he left, I sat at my desk, contemplating how to share this news with my family. In the past, I wouldn't have told them at all, knowing they wouldn't understand or value these particular achievements. Now, things were different. We had established a new pattern of communication, one based on mutual respect rather than predetermined expectations. My father regularly asked about my work, making genuine efforts to understand the technical aspects when I could share them. My mother had stopped asking when I planned to leave the service and start a family, instead inquiring about my team and the challenges we faced. I decided to call them that evening. My mother answered, her voice warm with genuine pleasure at hearing from me. Emma, what a nice surprise. Your father's just walked in, let me put you on speaker. Hi, Mom. Dad, I said, gathering my thoughts. I received some news today I wanted to share with you both. Good news, I hope, my father asked. Yes, I confirmed. I'm being considered for promotion to lieutenant colonel. It's not final yet, but my commanding officer seems confident. Emma, that's wonderful, my mother exclaimed. Isn't that ahead of schedule? The fact that she even knew there was a standard schedule for military promotions showed how much effort she had made to understand my world. It is, I acknowledged. By about 3 years. Not surprising, my father said, and I could hear the pride in his voice. Your recent operation was exceptional work. There's something else, I continued. I've been nominated for the Distinguished Service Medal. There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line, then my father spoke, his voice unusually emotional. The Distinguished Service Medal? Emma, that's extraordinary. What does it mean? My mother asked. I know it's important, but it's one of the highest honors in military service, my father explained to her, then addressed me again. Emma, in my entire career, I only saw it awarded a handful of times. This is a significant recognition. Thank you, I said simply. It's still just a nomination at this point. When would the ceremony be? My mother asked. We want to be there, both of us. If it's approved, probably within the next 3 months. I'll let you know as soon as I have details. We'll be there, my father promised. No matter when or where. After we said our goodbyes, I sat in the quiet of my apartment, reflecting on how completely things had changed. 3 years ago, I wouldn't have shared this news with them. 2 years ago, they might have acknowledged it politely but without real understanding. A year ago, they might have been proud but still somewhat confused about why such honors were being bestowed for work they couldn't fully comprehend. Now, they were not just accepting my path but actively celebrating it. The transformation wasn't just in how they saw me, but in how they had expanded their own definitions of service, of value, of achievement. 2 months later, the notifications came through officially. The promotion was approved. The medal nomination was confirmed. The ceremony would take place at the Pentagon in 4 weeks. I called my parents immediately to share the details. They had already made arrangements to be in Washington that entire week, anticipating the news. Your brother will be there too, my mother informed me. He's arranged leave specifically for this. And Nathan, my father asked, referring to my partner. Will he be attending? The casual way he included Nathan in the family conversation was yet another sign of how much had changed. When I first introduced them, my father had been polite but distant. Now he regularly asked about Nathan's work and had even begun discussing technical matters with him, finding common ground in their shared intelligence backgrounds. Yes, he'll be there, I confirmed. His director approved his attendance. Good, my father said simply. Family should be together for these moments. Family. Such a simple word, but one that had taken on new meaning for us all. No longer defined by rigid roles or expectations, but by mutual respect and support. The day of the ceremony arrived with perfect spring weather in Washington. The Pentagon courtyard had been prepared with rows of chairs, a small stage, and the formal trappings of military ceremony. As I stood in my dress uniform waiting for proceedings to begin, I caught sight of my family in the front row, my parents, Michael in his naval uniform, and Nathan in his dark suit. My mother caught my eye and smiled warmly. My father sat with perfect military posture, but his expression held an openness I had rarely seen in public settings. Michael gave me a subtle thumbs up. Nathan simply nodded, his eyes conveying everything I needed to know. The ceremony proceeded with the precision and formality characteristic of military traditions. My promotion was announced, my new rank insignia presented. Then came the medal, the Distinguished Service Medal with its distinctive blue center surrounded by gold rays, hanging from a blue and white ribbon. As the citation was read detailing my contributions to national security, I stood at attention, focusing on maintaining proper military bearing. But inside, I was aware of how extraordinary this moment truly was, not just for the honor being bestowed, but for the journey it represented. When the Secretary of Defense placed the medal around my neck, he spoke quietly for only me to hear. Your father defined one era of military excellence, Lieutenant Colonel Thompson. You're defining the next. After the ceremony concluded, my family gathered around me, offering congratulations and taking photos. My father, still formal and public, shook my hand properly before surprising me with a brief but heartfelt embrace. I couldn't be prouder, he said simply. My mother hugged me with less restraint. You were always meant for extraordinary things, Emma. I'm sorry it took us so long to see it. Michael saluted me crisply, then grinned. Does this mean I have to call you Lieutenant Colonel now? Nathan stood slightly apart, giving my family their moment, but I reached out and drew him into our circle. None of this would have happened without your support, I told him. That evening, we gathered for dinner at one of Washington's finest restaurants, a celebration planned by my parents. As we sat around the table sharing stories and laughter, I was struck by how natural it felt now, how easily we had finally found our way to mutual understanding. During a lull in the conversation, my father raised his glass. A toast, he said, his voice carrying the authority of decades of command. To Lieutenant Colonel Emma Thompson, whose courage in following her own path has shown us all that true service knows many forms. And to family, my mother added softly, who sometimes learns its most important lessons from the very people it tried to teach. As glasses clinked and smiles were exchanged, I felt a sense of completion that had nothing to do with medals or promotions. The real achievement wasn't the recognition I had received today, it was the journey that had brought us all to this moment of genuine connection and respect. Later that night, as Nathan and I walked back to our apartment under a clear star-filled sky, he asked me a question that made me pause. If you could go back and tell your younger self, that girl taking apart radios in her bedroom while her family looked the other way, about today, what would you say? I considered this carefully, watching our breath form clouds in the cool evening air. I'd tell her that the path won't be easy, I said finally. That there will be moments of doubt and loneliness. Times when she'll question whether she's made the right choice in following her own direction instead of the one laid out for her. I paused, looking up at the stars. But I'd also tell her that staying true to herself, even when no one else understands or supports that truth, is the most important battle she'll ever fight. And ultimately, the one that matters most. Nathan squeezed my hand. And would you tell her about today? About the medal and the promotion? No, I said with certainty. Those aren't the victories that would matter to her. I'd tell her instead that one day, her family will see her, truly see her, for exactly who she is. And that in the end, that recognition will mean more than any medal ever could. We walked in comfortable silence for a few minutes before he spoke again. You know, what you've done goes beyond your family. You've helped redefine what service means in the modern era. Shown that heroism doesn't always look like what we expect. That wasn't my intention, I admitted. I was just following what I was good at, what fascinated me. The most important paths are often the ones we don't consciously choose, he replied. They choose us, through our natural abilities, our deepest interests, the problems that call to us most strongly. As we reached our building, I looked back at the city skyline, the monuments and buildings that represented the nation we both served in our different ways. The world is changing, I said. The threats, the challenges, the tools we need to address them, everything is evolving faster than most people realize. And that's exactly why your story matters, Nathan said. It reminds us that sometimes the people who seem least conventional, who fit least neatly into established categories, are exactly the ones we need most urgently. That night, as I carefully placed my new medal beside my father's bronze star in the wooden box on my dresser, I reflected on the strange, winding path that had brought me here. From the girl who wasn't seen to the officer whose work had been recognized at the highest levels. From the family disappointment to the standard bearer for a new kind of service. The journey hadn't been about proving my family wrong, though. There had been times when that motivation had sustained me. It had been about staying true to my own internal compass, even when every external signal suggested I was moving in the wrong direction. In doing so, I hadn't just found my place in the world. I had helped create a new place, one that hadn't existed before, one that expanded the very definition of what service could look like, what courage could mean, what legacy could encompass. And perhaps that was the most important lesson of all, that our greatest contributions often come not from following established paths, but from having the courage to forge new ones. Not from meeting others' expectations, but from exceeding our own. Not from fitting neatly into predetermined categories, but from redefining those categories for generations to come. 5 years passed in what felt like the blink of an eye. My career advanced steadily, from lieutenant colonel to colonel, with increasing responsibilities and widening influence. I now led the Joint Cyber Defense Command, overseeing teams across multiple agencies and military branches. The small, windowless office I once occupied had been replaced by a corner suite with actual natural light, a rare commodity in the Pentagon. But the most profound changes weren't in my professional status. They were in the relationships that had once been sources of pain and now had transformed into foundations of strength. My father, now in his 70s but still ramrod straight and mentally sharp, had become one of my strongest advocates. He spoke at military conferences about the evolution of warfare in the digital age, citing my operations as case studies without revealing classified details. He had embraced technology with unexpected enthusiasm, mastering his smartphone and even taking online courses in basic programming to better understand your world, as he put it. My mother had found her own way to bridge our different paths. She volunteered with a STEM education program for girls, often sharing stories about my daughter the Colonel, to inspire young women interested in technology and service. She had transformed from someone who once gently pushed me toward safer pursuits into someone who actively championed unconventional choices. Michael and I had developed the kind of sibling relationship I had always wanted but never thought possible. He now commanded his own naval unit, and we spoke regularly, comparing leadership challenges and strategies across our different domains of operation. The competitive dynamic our father had once fostered between us had evolved into mutual respect and genuine collaboration. On a crisp autumn morning, I was reviewing threat assessments in my office when my secure line rang. It was General Davis, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. "Colonel Thompson," he said without preamble, "we need you in the Situation Room. Something's developing that requires your expertise." "Yes, sir. On my way." I gathered my tablet and credentials, wondering what had triggered a direct call from the chairman. Usually, these requests came through proper channels with at least some context provided. The Situation Room was already filled with senior military and intelligence leaders when I arrived. The President's National Security Advisor nodded to me as I took my seat. "Colonel Thompson, thank you for coming quickly," General Davis said. "We have a developing situation in the South China Sea that has unusual characteristics." He gestured to the main screen where satellite imagery showed what appeared to be a naval confrontation in progress. American and Chinese vessels were positioned in a standoff configuration, with a third smaller vessel between them. 3 hours ago, one of our surveillance drones detected anomalous electronic signatures from this Chinese destroyer, he continued, highlighting one of the vessels. Shortly after, our naval communications in the region began experiencing disruptions. Not jamming in the traditional sense, but something more sophisticated. Admiral Chen, Pacific Fleet Commander, spoke next. "Our vessels report their navigation systems showing inconsistent readings. GPS coordinates shifting. Radar returns that don't match visual confirmations. Communications that arrive corrupted or with timestamps that don't align." I studied the imagery and data scrolling across the secondary screens. "This isn't conventional electronic warfare," I said. "These are symptoms of quantum-based communication interference." The room fell silent. Quantum computing had been a theoretical threat in cybersecurity circles for years, a technology that could potentially break existing encryption methods and create new forms of electronic warfare. But most intelligence assessments had placed practical implementation at least a decade away. "You're certain?" the National Security Advisor asked. "Not without direct analysis of the signals," I admitted. "But the pattern matches the theoretical models we've developed. Inconsistent rather than blocked signals. Time discrepancies. System contradictions that appear random but follow subtle patterns." General Davis leaned forward. "If you're right, what are we dealing with?" "A quantum electronic warfare capability. That could render our conventional communications and navigation systems unreliable," I explained. "Not by blocking them, but by creating uncertainty about whether the information they provide is accurate. In a combat situation, that's potentially more dangerous than complete signal loss." "Options?" the President's advisor asked bluntly. I took a moment to organize my thoughts. This wasn't a situation anyone had faced before, we were in uncharted territory with potentially catastrophic consequences. "First, we need confirmation," I said. "I'll need direct access to the signal data from our vessels in the region." "Already being compiled," Admiral Chen confirmed. "Second, we need to isolate our critical systems from the interference. That means falling back to pre-digital communication methods where possible and implementing quantum-resistant protocols. Where we can't." I turned to face the National Security Advisor directly. "And third, we need to understand that this is not just a tactical situation. If China has deployed functional quantum electronic warfare capabilities, the strategic balance has shifted in ways we haven't prepared for." The gravity of my assessment wasn't lost on anyone in the room. The Admiral broke the silence. "Colonel, how quickly can your team analyze the data and develop countermeasures?" "For preliminary analysis, 12 hours, I replied. "For effective countermeasures, that depends on what we find." The National Security Advisor nodded decisively. "You have whatever resources you need. The President will want options by tomorrow morning." As the meeting adjourned, General Davis pulled me aside. "Thompson, if you're right about this, we're looking at a fundamental shift in warfare capabilities. The kind that happens once in a generation." "Yes, sir. Your team is the best we have for this," he said. "But I need to know, are we prepared for this kind of threat?" I respected him too much to offer false reassurance. "Not fully, sir. We've developed theoretical defenses against quantum interference, but we haven't implemented them widely because the threat timeline seemed distant." He nodded, absorbing this reality. "Then we adapt. That's what soldiers do." For the next 48 hours, my team and I worked without breaks, analyzing the signal data from the South China Sea incident, consulting with quantum computing specialists from across government and private sectors, and developing potential countermeasures. The confirmation came at hour 18, we were indeed facing a sophisticated quantum interference system. It wasn't as advanced as our worst-case scenarios had projected, but it was functional enough to create serious operational challenges. It's like they found a way to put our systems in a state of perpetual uncertainty, Dr. Levine, our lead quantum specialist, explained during our internal briefing. Not breaking our encryption, but making systems question their own data. Lisa Chen, now my deputy director, summed it up more directly. They've weaponized doubt. By hour 36, we had developed preliminary countermeasures, a combination of quantum-resistant communication protocols for critical systems and a strategic regression to analog methods for others. It wasn't elegant, but it would provide a stopgap while we developed more sophisticated responses. At hour 47, I stood before the President and National Security Council, presenting our findings and recommendations. The weight of the moment wasn't lost on me. This briefing would shape national security strategy for years to come. Mr. President, I concluded after outlining our immediate countermeasures, this incident represents a strategic inflection point. Quantum capabilities will redefine the balance of power in ways we're only beginning to understand. We need a whole-of-government approach to quantum security, and we need it immediately. The President, known for his direct manner, looked at me thoughtfully. You're proposing a Manhattan Project for quantum security. Yes, sir. Exactly that. He turned to his advisors. Make it happen. Colonel Thompson, I want you to lead the military component of this initiative. I blinked, surprised by the immediate decision. Sir, there are others with more technical expertise in quantum computing. But none with your combination of technical understanding, operational experience, and strategic vision, he replied. This isn't just a technical challenge, it's a fundamental rethinking of how we approach security in the digital age. That's been your focus for years. After the meeting, as I gathered my materials, the Secretary of Defense approached me. The President's right, you know. This assignment makes perfect sense. It's a significant expansion of my current responsibilities, I observed. He smiled slightly. Consider it preparation for your next promotion. The stars aren't far off. Colonel. Stars? General officer rank. The highest echelon of military leadership, traditionally dominated by combat arms officers. The idea that I, a cyber operations specialist who had never commanded troops in conventional battle, could reach that level would have seemed impossible just a few years earlier. As I walked back to my office, I felt the weight of this new responsibility settling on my shoulders. The Quantum Security Initiative would require coordination across military branches, intelligence agencies, research institutions, and private industry. It would mean building consensus, securing funding, and translating highly technical concepts into strategic frameworks that policymakers could understand and support. It was, in many ways, exactly the kind of challenge I had been preparing for my entire career, not just through my technical training and operational experience, but through the years of navigating between worlds that didn't naturally communicate with each other. Before diving into the mountain of work ahead, I made a call I wouldn't have considered a decade earlier. I called my father. Dad? Do you have a few minutes? I could use your perspective on something. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell, so you don't miss any upload from us.